The Gospel according to John, chapter 9, verses 8 to 21. The neighbours therefore, and they which before had seen him that was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. But he said, I am he. Therefore said they unto him, How were thine eyes opened? He answered and said, A man that is called Jesus made clay, and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. Then said they unto him, Where is he? He said, I know not. They brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind. And it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then again the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He said unto them, He put clay upon mine eyes, and I washed, and so see. Therefore said some of the Pharisees, This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, How can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. They say unto the blind man again, What sayest thou of him, that he hath opened thine eyes? He said, He is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him, that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, Is this your son, who ye say was born blind? How then doth he now see? His parents answered them and said, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now seeth we know not, or who hath opened his eyes we know not. He is of age, ask him, he shall speak for himself. There endeth our reading. Thank you, Lord. Amen. In yesterday's reading from chapter 9 of the Gospel of John, we were witness to Jesus and his disciples leaving the temple in Jerusalem after that great disputation with the Pharisees, and coming upon a beggar who was blind from birth, and Jesus' disciples had asked him, was it the man that sinned or his parents for him to be in such a state? Jesus had said neither, but that he was blind in order to manifest the works of God, and he had then proceeded to put clay made of spittle and earth onto the man's eyes, instructed him to wash in the pool of Siloam, just outside the city wall, and the man had done that and regained his sight. And this narrative continues in today's reading. This is a lengthy set of verses that does not actually include the presence of Jesus, and it gives us a tremendous insight into the Jewish customs of those days and the grave difficulties that individuals could get into with the Pharisees and Sanhedrin. So the man has gone back home with his sight, presumably full of joy, and the neighbours are astonished. Is not this he that sat and begged, that was blind? And because it's such a tremendous miracle, some say, yes, it is him, but others say, well, it can only be someone like him. But when he hears them arguing, he says, it is me, I have regained my sight. And of course they ask him, well, how were your eyes opened? Now, in his answer, in the original Greek, it would be the man that is called Jesus. So Jesus would have been a person of some fame in Jerusalem and known to nearly all people. So he answers and says, the man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, wash in the pool of Siloam. I did so, and I received my sight. And they ask him, "Where is Jesus?" And he says, "I know not." Now, it's an interesting thing that this man is thereafter brought to the Pharisees, and we also learn that some members of the Sanhedrin were present too. Quite unfortunate, instead of celebrating the healing, some of the neighbors are worried that there's been an infraction of the law. Healing on the Sabbath was strictly forbidden unless it was a case of extreme danger. This man had been blind from birth. It was not urgent in that sense, yet he had been healed on the Sabbath. And the neighbors, I think, are frightened that they know this, and they want to be straight with the ruling body of Jews, and therefore they bring the man to the Pharisees. And we're told here in verse 14 that it's the Sabbath day when this happened. Now, the Pharisees ask him the same question: how had he received his sight? And he gives a shorter, a more concise answer. Now, it may be just that the narrative is more concise because the reader knows, or it may be that he really did give a more concise answer in order to try to mitigate against the accusations against Jesus. The rules about healing on the Sabbath, or what you could do on the Sabbath, were incredibly specific. So, for example, it was not allowed to put spit on the eyes on the Sabbath. And so he didn't mention the spittle here. He just talks about clay, and he doesn't talk about being told to wash his eyes. He just says that he went and washed. So I think he's trying to protect Jesus here, because he knows what all this is about. As we'll see in today's reading and tomorrow's, the man who was cured is very switched on and probably has a pretty dim view actually of the Pharisees. Why? Well, all his life he's been at the temple gate begging, and probably been looked down on as a sinner for being born blind, or the son of sinners. He will not have experienced much love or mercy from the Jewish hierarchy. So I don't believe he has any desire to help them or to meet them halfway. He's a man of tremendous spirit, as we'll see. Now, there is a disputation amongst the Pharisees. The more hardline group, maybe some of them who were disputing with Jesus in the temple earlier that day, say this man is not of God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath, which is so precious to us. And yet others say, but if he is from the devil or from evil, how can he do such miracles of healing? Surely to restore the sight of a man blind from birth is a great miracle. And I think I mentioned yesterday, it's important that the man was blind from birth in terms of the nature of the miracle, because there were healings done of that time by doctors that could restore some particular disorders of blindness, because some of these blindnesses were caused by parasites or by irritation from sand and so on. But blindness from birth was seen as an absolutely beyond any form of healing, as it is today in most cases, tragically. So this is why it's seen as such a miracle. Now, we don't know exactly which are the Pharisees and or Sanhedrin members who are defending Jesus here, but we would like to think that someone like Nicodemus could be among them, and we're reminded of the meeting of Nicodemus with Jesus all the way back in chapter 3, many Jerusalem visits ago. He came by night to Jesus, and in verse 2 of chapter 3, Nicodemus says to Jesus, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. So certainly some members of the Jewish hierarchy are very well aware that Jesus must have some divine connection or origin to be able to do such wonderful acts of healing. Ironically, most of their colleagues are blind to the spiritual nature of the work of Jesus because of jealousy and ego and fear and so on. Now, because there's a dispute among them, they actually ask the blind man, what does he think? What do you say of him that has restored your sight? And as we see, this is a man of spirit, and he doesn't mince his words. He says he is a prophet, not in terms of someone that can foresee the future, but someone from God. He is from God. This is God's work. And that, of course, would irritate tremendously most of the hierarchy here. So instead of arguing about whether this was a sin or not, they start to question, well, maybe he was never blind. Maybe there's no miracle here. It's just all deception. And so they call the parents of him that had received his sight. Now we have to understand that the reason that, as we'll see, that the parents are very cautious in what they say, and that the man also tries to walk a very careful line in what he says, is that hovering over them is the threat of excommunication from the Jewish people, essentially being expelled from the synagogue. Language that we're going to see in tomorrow's reading was not a small matter. This was actual social exclusion of the most extreme kind. It could be a lifelong ban from social interaction with Jewish people. You would be treated literally like a leper for the rest of your life. No one could speak with you, no one could come within a few paces of you. In our COVID times, it would be like someone who has COVID, who's walking down a shopping mall. People would be fleeing from them in the early days because of fear. So this is no small matter, and for the parents of the man that was made blind, I'm sure they love their son. I'm sure they're joyous at the fact that he's received his sight, but they don't want to lose their Jewish privileges, namely their ability to live in a Jewish society for the rest of their lives. So as we'll see, they're very cautious in what they say. So the parents are called forth, and they are asked 3 questions. Is this your son? Was he born blind? And how is it that he now sees? And they're confident in answering the first 2 questions. Yes, we know that this is our son, and we know that he was born blind. And just one thing that does come to mind here, in the fact that the neighbours were arguing whether it was the same person, and the parents say, we know that this is our son. I do wonder whether the form of congenital blindness that the man had was of a particularly severe kind, where he may not even have had the organs of the eyes actually formed. Because if you imagine someone who has that most profound of deformities from birth, where there's not even the eyes formed, if you were to see that person again later with eyes, it would be a tremendous change in their appearance, as opposed to someone who has their eyes formed but cannot see through them, which is a more common form of congenital blindness. Sometimes the eyes are misshapen because they haven't formed properly inside, but if there were, something of the appearance of eyes in the person's visage, it would not be such a dramatic change if they had regained their sight. So my sense is perhaps that this poor man was actually born profoundly without any development of the ocular organs at birth. But the parents say, we know that this is our son. That would be easy for them to discern from everything else about his appearance and behavior and speech and so on. But in verse 21, they don't even skirt around the 3rd question, they flee from it because they don't want to get involved in talking about Jesus, because anyone who expressed belief in Jesus was in grave danger of excommunication. By what means he now sees we know not, or who hath opened his eyes we know not. They weren't present, they don't know anything. He is of age, ask him, he shall speak for himself. It's verging on the cowardly, actually, of the parents. We don't know how old the man is, whether he is 18 or 19, in which case it would be pretty cowardly of the parents to leave him so exposed. On the other hand, if he was, say, in his 30s, it's not that unreasonable that they are saying, well, he's a grown man. Ask him. We don't know anything. Leave us alone, basically. And because of the length of this fascinating interaction between ordinary Jewish people and the Jewish hierarchy, we'll just have a break in this interaction at the end of today's reading and continue tomorrow, and we will be witness to the wonderful spirit of this man, one of the very early disciples and proclaimers of the holy glory of Jesus Christ.